just believe in the power of healing and restoration. And I know that if we can just come together and speak about the hard things, we can finally begin to heal. So, this is where we heal.
Well, welcome to another episode of This Is Where We Heal podcast. Today I have a very special guest, Larry Hagner. Larry is a father, a husband, and he actually happens to have the #1 podcast for dads in, is it the country?
World, actually.
In the world?
Yes, in the world. I know it's, I just went on this morning actually to our rankings, and yeah.
That's incredible.
It's crazy.
Do you feel like a celebrity now?
No. But I mean, truth be told, like, I mean, I don't know how many, there's not that many dad podcasts out there.
Yeah,
I mean,
but still, the
I don't know
world?
how many there are. Yeah.
Like,
Which has been really cool. I mean, yeah, we've been, like, we actually can go and see, like, the countries that actually download the show, where they download the show, how many downloads they get, and thank you for all you guys out in Australia, by the way.
I know,
a huge
right?
country for Dad Edge. But
I
yeah.
love that. Makes me want to move to Australia, you know?
I mean, just the way they talk alone is pretty
That'll
cool.
get you.
Yeah.
Was it my last guest? I think I want him to go on your show. I think he'd be incredible. Ryan Morbsby White, I think is his name. Anyway, Australian, great guy. He does like inner child work with men. It's great. You would love him. You guys would hit it off so well.
I would love to meet him, but yeah, like.
So Ryan, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Ryan.
moving on. This isn't about you, Ryan. Sorry. This is about Larry today. And so, actually, I wanted you to come on the show because, well, one, we had a great conversation when I came on yours about abuse and domestic violence and all those things. But very rarely do we get, like, the male perspective of relationships, especially on podcasts like this, right? I want to talk about love, relationships, but I want to also talk about, like, your evolution into wanting to be a better husband and father and man in general, and to make women feel more safe just as a whole. Like, and we've talked a little bit about that, but I really want to dive into that today.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm excited. I mean, for me, it's been a stumbling journey. Like lots of bear traps. In fact, it was funny, today's podcast that I just launched on my own, I think today was 1,295. That was the episode today. And it was me just being like an absolute shit show for the past 6 months. And basically everything that I teach, I was completely fumbling and falling on my face. And so I told my son this morning, my oldest son, I sent him the podcast. I was like, hey, just want to let you know your old man just shared with the entire world how much he sucked for the past 6 months. And I gave a whole detailed podcast on it. So
wow.
Yeah.
I mean, can we dive into that?
Yeah, sure.
I want to know what you mean by that. And I like that you're being so open about it. Like, talk about that, what that was.
Yeah, you know, and I'm happy to share my story because I honestly feel like this question is perfect for #1 your show, but also just for this journey as being a man, husband, and father, because it's not perfect.
Right.
Like, and I think a lot of guys put a lot of stress on themselves that it has to look a certain way. We can't screw up. And to be quite honest, I think a lot of us too, we get sort of cold and angry, and not at you guys or the family. It's actually at ourselves.
Oh.
But yeah, we radiate that kind of energy, but then we're upset, but it's actually, we're pretty frustrated with ourselves.
Oh.
But yeah, so just to kind of give you an example, I have 4 boys. If you ever want to know what that's like, just think of your life as a college student at a fraternity party, except for the fraternity party never ends.
And you're paying for it all.
You're paying for it all. Yeah. Nobody ever sleeps. Everybody's drunk and you never leave. That's my house. I am not kidding. I've said things out loud in my house that just kind of paint a picture where, like, you know how you see things in certain spots and you're like, that shouldn't be there. And you give like a double take and a triple take. No kidding around, 3 or 4 months ago, use the restroom. I'm washing my hands. And yes, truth be told, guys do wash their hands.
Yay.
Wash my hands. And I look over and I see something there. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's what I think it was, but it shouldn't be there. And I literally looked over. I was like, that's a half-eaten Uncrustable on the sink of my bathroom. And I'm like, and for a minute, I was like, I shouldn't have left that there. No, I'm kidding. I was like, who? Like, how? What? How? Like, how did they get? And I'm sitting there thinking, like,
Does somebody like come in and be like, I gotta go to the bathroom, I put this right here, and they forget about it? Or like, God forbid, like someone is doing number 2 and they're eating it while I'm like, what is happening in my house? But like, that is my house.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
If it makes you feel better, I've had to have these conversations with my daughter. I've
Oh,
even
really?
had to tell her, like, hey, like, food doesn't belong in the bathroom. And I know it, I mean, a bathtub experience, maybe like a little snack, maybe.
Yeah.
But regular, like, just bathroom stuff, we don't need to bring our food with us.
We
really don't.
Yeah, there's certain places food should not
We
be.
draw the line at the door on that one. On that particular room, let's just keep it what it is.
I 100% agree. But yeah, just to paint a picture. So my wife and I have been married for 21 years. We have 4 boys, 18, 17, 11, and 8. And we've always had, like, I would say it's actually been really manageable, for us, because especially for kids' activities. So in the fall time, we normally have our big guys. We call them the bigs and the littles. So our big guys will do, like, my oldest is in charge of the high school marching band. So he's the drum major. So he conducts the whole band. And then my 17-year-old is starting center for the football team. So Friday night lights, the little guys come with us. It's great. It's magical. It's awesome. Well, this year, and then our little guys are in spring sports. So it's like 2 and 2, very manageable. So, but this year, my 5th grader's like, I want to be like my big brother, Mason, and he wants to play football.
Oh.
So he's like, we sign him up for 5th grade tackle football. Well, then I bring my 8-year-old, who we're still trying to find like what he liked, and I bring him to a hockey game last year, and he's like, this is what I want to do. I was like, you want to play hockey? And he's like, I would love to play hockey. So we started him with like learn to play, and then fall sport hockey. And for those of you guys who have kids in hockey, that it is like a part-time job. So anyway, 4 kids, super demanding sports. All the while, it's also the holidays, which the holiday months are kind of tough for me, like between Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's. Like, it just, that stint like brings up, I think, a lot of bad memories for me. Number one, yeah. And then it also, like, you're trying to give like a good holiday to your kids despite your past, and you kind of like battle with things a little bit. And on top of it, I'm a very active person. I want to be outdoors, and like not being outdoors, it kind of sucks. Yeah. So we've been in this extreme like 6 month of absolute busyness. And like my wife and I like literally dividing and conquering. It's like air traffic control. Okay, you got hockey, I got wrestling. Okay. And we have a wrestler now too. So it's like, okay, you got football, I got this, and it's like literally we're just going in every different direction. And there was not, I don't think that there is an evening that I can remember, except for there might be some one-offs where we didn't have something going on. And our family we're all about connection and family dinners and that kind of thing. And none of that was happening. And it was like really, really starting to wear on me and my wife too. And it just got to the point where my patience was really tested. Not just, and here's the funny thing, of course I'm going to have patience tested with my kids. Yeah. And of course I'm going to have patience tested in my business and just life in general. But I also have patience tested with myself, because I think we hold ourselves to a pretty high standard, as parents, especially with what I do. And I felt like, and I got to be honest, like I kind of sucked. Like I had more, and you and I even talked about this. I had more times where I was angry, withdrawn, maybe even somewhat cold, not meaning to be, and just where you just lose your patience. And that's not who I am. And that's who I was becoming, because there was no margin. And I did a podcast today about like how I literally like went into an absolute rage in my house, which is very unlike me, because we have this 18-month-old Bernedoodle dog that literally, this dog is like disaster pants. Like he pees on people. I'm not kidding. He jumps when he sees people and pees on them. He jumps in our car, pees in our car. He jumps in other people's car. My son's girlfriend's dad jumped in his car, peed in his car, pees on our furniture. And I've told my kids, I was like, if this dog pees one more time, I'm gonna like literally like lose my mind. We just bought a brand new couch. This was when we got a foot of snow. He jumps up on the couch full of snow and pees all over it. And I was like, oh my God. And it was that day that we were like going to go sledding and all. And I literally went into a freaking rage. Like that was like and I don't do that like ever. Yeah. And I was just like, I'm done with this effing dog. Like I was like yelling about it. And luckily it was just my wife and my oldest son. And after my son was like, what is going on? And I was like, this effing dog and this effing dog. Like, I'm just tired of it. And like, I just went nuts. And what I noticed was it was literally just a buildup of all those things, and I just exploded. So here's the kicker. And this is where you really get like a slap in the face wake up call. So my son, I went downstairs to get something. My son had went outside and there's like a foot of snow. I assumed he went out there to sled, and I saw my son from our slider and the walkout sitting on a retaining wall like this with his hands in his head and just sitting there alone. And I just had that thought of like, could he be sitting out there? And I wasn't mad at him, but it was the energy that I was like, I was mad at the dog, but he was like, saw me get mad. And I was like, could it be that he's so upset at what just happened? Like that he just doesn't know what to do with himself. And I asked him about it later, and I was like, were you sitting outside because you were upset at what happened? And he's like, I was. And I'm like, oh. I was like, okay. I was like, what was, and we were calm. I was calm at that point, obviously. And I go, what was going through your mind? And he took a deep breath and he goes, I'm going to tell you, but you're not going to like hearing it. I'm like, okay. And he said, I was thinking I didn't want to be at the house anymore. And I was like, it was like the oxygen got sucked out of the room. I was like, tell me more about that. And he said, you've been colder lately, like for a while. Like I'm scared to make you mad because I feel like there's just, you guys are always going, you're always stressed out. Like, and there's just tension that it's never been a part of our family. It's here. And he's like, and it's not the first time I've thought that. I was like, you're not okay. I was like, so how often have you thought that? He's like, not often, but a few times. But a few times for me is too much.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. I was like, thanks for telling me that. I was like, my whole goal, my whole mission, like everything about our family, it's the opposite extreme that I want you to feel. I never want you to feel that. That's the way I felt growing up. And I literally went to my wife, got her feedback, went to every single one of my kids, got their feedback. And I went and had conversations with each one of them individually and as a group. And I was like, and just owned everything of it. And I was like, I'm so sorry about this. And I'm going to make a podcast about it, just telling everybody. And here's the funny thing. And that podcast went out this morning. And I woke up to so many DMs and emails of how much that hit people and how they were going through things too. But yeah, like this whole thing of fatherhood and relationships is definitely not always golden, even if you're doing the work that like I'm doing, that you're doing.
Right. Well, I was going to say, like, especially because you put a certain level of pressure on yourself that like even a regular person doesn't have. Like, and there's a lot of pressure being a father. There's a lot of pressure being a parent, just in general, a spouse. Like that pressure alone is a lot, especially with like 4 kids, a wife that also needs you and wants you to. Like being able to like split yourself up in so many different ways and still give enough to everybody, but also having to invest in yourself a little bit. Like how do you even do that is the thing. And then when you consider that not only are you completely spread too thin everywhere you look all the time, don't have probably enough time for yourself, overworked with everything you're doing, which you love to do, but also there's this pressure of if I'm going to say and do and be growing in these areas where I'm talking to other dads and spouses, like I have to be a certain thing. And then when you're falling short in that, like everything is just like crumbling around you because you're failing in every area, right?
100%. Yeah.
And I feel for you on that. Like I can't even imagine. But I also think that, and this is why, and we're going to go back to this, but the fact that you're at a place in your life as a husband and a father where you can literally stop and go, oh my God, a lot of the chaos in our home right now is me.
Yeah.
It's me. Everyone else is still normal. Everyone else is coping. They're going through the same things as me, but I'm the one that's the ticking time bomb here. And being able to like see that alone is just huge. And I think it's so important for men to hear that like the expectation isn't perfection. It's just self-awareness. It's like being able to say, oh man, like I'm not showing up how I should be for everyone in my life or for myself.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
And people, not even just men, but just people in general. Like, but what I love about that is that I know you haven't always been that way. That it's been like a progression of growing and evolving, and like being willing and open to learn and take, feedback from the people you love. And so I want to go like way, way, way back to the younger version of yourself. And I want you to start there before you were this man that you are now, that can get on a podcast and talk for an hour about, hey, I have just screwed up royally for the last 6 months and I haven't been who I even want you guys to be. Like, tell me who you were. Like, where was the starting point for you where you were finally like, I want to be a better human? Like, let's go back there.
So I think that was a journey that, like, it's been a little crazy, but I think it really kind of started when I was a kid. So my mom and biological father, they got married really young, like 21. I was born in 75. I think they were married in 71, and they were married for like 4 years. They had me in 75, and then 9 months, I think a year after I was born, like my mom and dad went through a horrific divorce, and he left. Mm-hmm. And I have absolutely no memory of my dad when I was young, because he was gone. And it was funny because when I was 4, I remember being in preschool. And I remember dads, like I remember men coming to pick up their kids, like some would wear suits and some would wear, and I just took notice, like, oh, well, that dad is in a suit, or that dad is in jeans or whatever. But I knew what a dad was, and I knew I didn't have one. Mm-hmm. It didn't bother me though, because like in my 4-year-old brain, I thought moms go out and find dads, like kids magically appear. Like literally, I'm not kidding. Like I used to watch the cartoons with a stork like brought the baby, and I'm like, well, I guess
that's how it works with dads, obviously.
Right? Yeah. So like, I thought my mom just hadn't found my dad yet, or our dad, like, or the dad. And I'll never forget being 4 years old. Like I still remember this. And my mom told me, she's like, hey, I'm gonna have a friend of mine over for dinner tonight. He's a really special friend. We work together, and I want you to meet him. That was my mom's way, I think, of telling me, I've been dating somebody at work, and it's about time you meet him. And I was like, oh my gosh. And in my mind, I was like, this must be the dad. This is the dad guy, right? Like, and this guy, I'll never forget it. It was cold outside, and I'm waiting there for him. And he like comes in the house. I had like this picture of what this guy's going to look like and everything. And as soon as I saw him, it was like kind of what I pictured. I was like, oh my God, that's him. And this guy walks in, and he's in a 3-piece suit, the double Windsor tie, the feathered hair. He's got the mustache. It's 1979.
I love it.
And he just like walks in, and I'm like, and I just like look up, and I'm like, oh my God. I was like, that's the dad. And I shake his hand, and I remember saying, first question, are you going to be my dad? Like,
oh my God.
And you as a mom, right? I think I literally remember hearing my mom gasp, like, and like he just like laughed and like looked at my mom, and he shook my hand. But I think my mom kind of like really took that as like this Jerry Maguire moment. Like when Jerry Maguire comes in, little kid hugs him, and I think my mom was like, oh my God, like I should probably marry this guy. Like my mom was only 29 at the time, so 6 months later they get married, and we're like a family. And I was like, oh my God, this is great. Like this is awesome. And the first year was awesome. But then I noticed he drank a lot, and my mom drank a lot, and they would just get in crazy fights. And my dad, and I call him dad because he adopted me. My last name is actually his. Oh. And, he adopted me, and like he was so angry when he would drink, and he would just beat the snot out of me. He beat up my mom. There were times, I remember one time being like 5 or 6. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and hearing my mom screaming. And I went into the bedroom, and my dad was holding my mom's arms down and on top of her. Nothing sexually was happening, but they were fighting physically, and he was holding her down on the bed. And I freaked out, and I remember going over to his hands, trying to peel his hands off my mom. And I was like beating the top of his hands, trying to get his fingers off of her. And he like gets up, and he like grabs me, and he throws me back in my room. And then I go back in there, and I'm doing the same thing again. He puts me back in my room, and I remember like hearing my mom scream, and the only thing that I could do was hold my hands over my ears. And I just screamed as loud as I could, because it was mostly because like I was in a panic, and I didn't want to hear my mom scream anymore. Well, back then, like our house, like the walls weren't that thick. Right. The neighbors heard me, and cops were called to my house. And that was not the first time cops came to my house because of domestic disturbances. But that turned into like literally 6 years of just absolute chaos. And that was experience of a dad and a husband. When I was 10, they got divorced and he left. And there's a part of me that I was very upset that I didn't have a dad anymore, but I was also like relieved. I was like, man, and back then too, like I'm going to be 50 this year. Back then, like if you came from a broken home, like divorces weren't as common as they are now, but if you came from a broken home, like you were like trash. Like you're like, oh, you're that kid. And so he left and I've never seen him since. I found out about 15 years ago he died. And I knew that because I was his only living heir with his last name. And this lady from the courts came and she said, hey, your father died. I don't know if you knew that. She's like, but here's a house that he left you. And it was in the ghetto. It was in Overland in St. Louis. And I just slid the papers back over. I was like, you can have it. I was like, I don't want it. I was like, just, you can auction it off. I want nothing to do with it. And she's like, are you sure this is a house? I was like, I want none of it. Take it. Give it to the city. I don't care. And she's like, okay, well, I just need you to sign this. And I did. I signed it over and that was it. And, but I'll go back when I was 12. 12 years old, started asking a lot of questions. I was like, I knew this guy came in at like 4. Like, what kid am I, right? My mom told me at that point, because I didn't know, that she was married and I had a dad. I was like, what? I was like, where is he? She's like, I don't know. She's like, but here's the wedding album. This is him. And I was like, holy crap. And I only knew his name. That was it. And I knew his last name. I knew his name was my name. And I knew his last name. And I'll never forget being 12 years old. And I knew that information. And never forget this. I was at a civic center in North County. I don't know, but if you're outside of St. Louis, you don't know that. But I was at a civic center playing basketball with one of my friends. And I went up to the front desk to get a basketball. I'm 12 years old with my best friend. And I heard the clerk behind the counter say, oh, here comes Mrs. my dad's last name with the hockey payment. And my dad's last name is not common. And I was like, that's really odd. I was like, that's my real dad's last name. And I looked at him and I go, because my dad played hockey up there. I go, did you say this last name? He said, yeah. I go, you said for her husband? He said, yeah. He goes, I said, what's her husband's name? He goes, oh, he plays hockey up here all the time. His name's Larry. And I'm like, oh my God, that's my dad. Like, that's my dad's name. So I stood to the side as she came walking in the door and I saw her give the check over and all that. And I went up to her and I tapped her. And I'm 12 years old. I tapped her on the shoulder and I said, excuse me. I was like, is your last name such and such? And she said, yeah. I go, are you married to a guy named Larry? And she said, yes, I am. I go, I think your husband's my dad. And this woman was like, she saw it like immediately. She's like, she goes, sweetheart, are you Larry? I said, yes, I am. And she goes, would you like to talk to your dad? And I was like, oh my God, I would love to. I would love to talk to my dad. She's like, and so she went around the corner, payphones, put a quarter in there, and she's like, hey, I just want to let you know, I'm here at the Civic Center. I just made the hockey payment, and I ran into your son. And she handed the phone over. She was very nice about it. Like her and my dad have been married for the past 45 years. And I'll never forget hearing this man's voice on the other end, and he sounded like he was on the verge of crying. Like I could hear like shock, but I heard like that voice. I don't even know what we talked about. All I know is we decided that we were going to meet face to face. I came home, I told my mom, she was like, holy crap. She was completely blown away. We ended up meeting and I met him. We spent the entire day together. He was married, had a 2-year-old son. His wife was pregnant with my youngest brother. And it was like magic. Like I immediately started calling him dad. I like looked at him. I was like, oh my God, I kind of sort of like look like this guy a little bit. And I was on cloud 9. And then we hung out like every week for like 6 months. And I knew his wife and my half brother. And then she was pregnant with her youngest. And then after about like 6 months, like something started to kind of change. And I didn't know really what it was. All I know is we were just kind of getting more distant. It was almost like, now that I'm an adult, the best way I could describe it is, think of somebody you've been dating and they're not interested in you anymore, but they haven't told you yet, but you know it's coming. You just feel it. that's what I felt. And I remember calling him one time. I remember where I was sitting and everything. And I just called him and I was like, hey, like, is everything okay? And I just feel like something's wrong. And I don't even know what the words were. I don't remember. All I know is that was the end of our relationship. And that was it. We parted ways. And I was like, wow. So I lost my biological father twice. My adopted dad was gone. And I was just kind of a mess after that. Like, I kind of gave up on school. I overate. I got really fat. Failed the 8th grade. Had to do 8th grade twice. And then went on to high school. That was a turning point. Went on to college. My mom continued to date just ridiculous, crazy men that came in and out. Just heavy, crazy drinkers, abusers. Just like, it was a shit show. Oh. And then the story kind of comes to an end, or the beginning, however you want to see it. I went to college, met my wife there. Like, we just hit it off. We've been together for ever since. And then when I was 30, we were married for 2 years. She was pregnant with our first son. I'm in a Starbucks in West County. I was in medical device sales, surgical sales, and we had a meeting there all the time with my team. And I'm sitting there, and this guy walks in, and he catches my eye, and I'm like, holy crap, that's my dad. My dad had walked in the Starbucks to get his morning coffee, and I knew exactly who he was. I hadn't seen him for 18 years. And one of the women who was on my team, still friends with her to this day, that was 20 years ago. I actually just had coffee with her again yesterday. But her and her husband, me and Jessica, like, the four of us, kind of like, we had a friendship outside of work, and we hung out and that kind of thing. So she knew that story. Mm-hmm. And she saw the look on my face, and she was just like, hey, like, are you still here? We're meeting. Like, I was like, sorry. I was like, you're not gonna believe this. I was like, my father just walked in here. She was like, wait, what? And she was like, who? And I pointed him out, and she's like, is that the guy you haven't seen since you were 12? I was like, yeah. She's like, oh my God, like, what are you gonna say to him? I was like, I'm not gonna say anything to him. She's like, you're gonna sit here and you're just gonna let your dad walk out of here? I was like, yeah. I was like, the guy, it's been 30 years. Like, he's really never been a part of my life. It'd be really awkward. Well, without another word, she just went over and sat with him. And I'm like, literally from me to like 50 feet away, I was like, what the hell is going on? And then all of a sudden I see him start to look around, and our eyes met, and he just like took this deep breath. And I don't know, I had no idea what she had said to him until after she went up to him, and she's like, hey, I'm just gonna sit here for a second. You don't know me, but I'm good friends with your oldest son who you've never had a relationship with. And I just want to let you know he's here, and you've really missed out. And you might have an opportunity to have a relationship with him. I had no idea she said that. She's very blunt. I had no idea she said that. And he came over. And I make my dad sound like he's dysfunctional. My dad's a very functional, he's actually a very good man, very successful entrepreneur. My 2 younger brothers, like, he's been married for 45 years to this other woman. And he came over and shook my hand, and he's like, hey, he's like, man, like, how are you? And I'm like, fine, how are you? And like, literally, I wasn't like nice, but I wasn't mean. I was kind of like in between. And he's like, we should, are you married? He's like, do you have kids? And I was like, I'm married. I was like, I have my first son on the way. And he's like, well, we should, and he gives me his card. This was like 2005. He gives me his card. He's like, we should get together. And I just slid his card back. And I said, here's my information. You call me if you want. I was like, and if you don't want to, I get it. Like, I don't expect anything. I didn't expect anything. 24 hours went by, and I was like, well, I knew he wasn't going to do anything with it. And then the next day I got an email that was like a dissertation. And it was basically him pouring his heart out of how much he had regretted, and how much he would, if he would have me back in his life, or him back in my life, that he would love to repair. And I thought about that, and I was like, oh God. I was like, I don't know if I can go through this again. And I was like, okay. And we went out to breakfast. And I'll never forget, we went to Denny's. And we're sitting there, and I'm like just awkwardly just trying to make small talk. And I remember like literally stopping and going like, look, man, I'm fumbling over my words. I'm trying to make small talk here. I was like, I don't know what the hell to do. I was like, I don't know even what to do with this. Like, I don't know what to even talk about. Like, I don't know. And my dad, at 50 something years old at the time, just leaned in and he goes, I think I do, because I don't either. And I was like, holy shit, we're like on the same playing field here.
So we just basically made an agreement. What would it be like if we just explored some sort of relationship? It doesn't have to be father-son, but just something. That was 20 years ago. And we have a great relationship. But it took a lot of work. And I wouldn't say it's taken a lot of, like, it's kind of fascinating how all the pieces fit together. I mean, I introduced you to my youngest brother, who's probably going to be on your show, but I mean, that relationship in of itself has been the biggest blessing. My youngest brother and I are so tight. We weren't even raised together, but yet it's terrifying. My wife and everybody else is like, it is terrifying how much you guys look alike, act alike, how you operate, everything. But
Dad Edge got started because 6 years later, I had a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. And I was like, I wanted to be a good father so badly. It was so important to me because I had had so many men in and out and just absolute chaos. I was like, no, if I do everything else wrong in life, I'm doing this thing right. Like no matter what. And I wasn't. Like, I didn't have the greatest marriage. I definitely wasn't the most patient father. And this all came to a head because I gave myself 3 promises. I'm going to be a good husband. I'm going to treat my wife right. I'm going to be a good husband. Number 2, I am going to be a good father. I'm not going to screw that one up. And number 3, I'm not going to strike my children out of anger ever, because I was beat a lot growing up, and just by random dudes. And I broke all three. And what started Dad Edge was when I broke the 3rd promise. So my son was 4. He's 205 pounds now and as strong as an absolute beast. And it's hilarious now. Like, he would kill me in a fight. But like, we were getting ready to move. And I remember being stressed out. And I remember that day I lost my biggest surgeon, like my biggest client. Like, basically this one surgeon that I worked with in medical device sales was about 60% of my income. And he went to my competitor because we had raised our prices on stuff. And it was a devastating blow. Mm-hmm. And I had to come home, tell my wife that. I was in a bad mood. So we're packing. I was packing his playroom because we were getting ready to move. Everything in boxes. I was in a bad mood. And my son comes downstairs to play in his playroom, my 4-year-old. And I looked at him. I said, hey, I just spent like the past 3 hours packing your playroom. I was like, please don't get anything out. You can play with all these toys, but just don't get anything out of the boxes. Well, that's an idiotic. Like, I look back on that being like, you're dumb. Like, you're just dumb. Like,
yeah, tell a 4-year-old not to play with a certain toy, and well, you just guarantee they will.
Yeah. So I come downstairs like 30 minutes later, and what do you think I came down to? Mm-hmm. Everything was pulled out, and I snapped. And I'm telling all this great stuff about like how I snap and freak out on people, which is awesome. But like, and I turned him around and I swatted him on the rear end. And unfortunately, I hit him on the rear end and he fell.
Oh.
And he fell down. And luckily he didn't get hurt, but I was like, oh my God, what the hell did I just do? I mean, it was like a reaction like that quickly. And I went to go like pick him up like this. And with that, he kind of like turned around and he just went like this. He like raised his hands up and closed his eyes. And I was like, that's all I saw. And I was like, oh my God, what have I become? Like, what have I just done? Like, that was me growing. Like, I saw me like just shuddering, like, please don't hurt me. Please don't hit me when men hit me. And I went into my office that night and that was it. I drew a line that night. I was crying in my office. I'm sitting in front of my computer. I'm on Facebook because that's what you do as an adult when you have a bad moment. You just go, I'm just going to go distract myself. But I saw this little button in the left-hand corner. It said create a page. And I'm a firm believer in God. I think that was like divine intervention. I clicked that button. Thing came up. It said, what do you want to name your page? I had never started a page. Never knew anything about it. The Good Dad Project. That's what I typed in there. And I never did it for a following, ever. All I did was, I was like, you know what? I am going to just learn something new every day as it pertains to being a better man, husband, communicator, more patient, all these things I want to be. I'm just going to go out and research it. I'm going to put it here just so I have a record of it, of what I'm learning. Well, that page ended up I never did it for a following. It was just for me. The page ended up getting like this huge following, like of people like that were engaging in it. And I was just like, this is really weird. Like, I'm talking about how bad I suck at this. Like, and these people are like liking it. I don't understand this. And the first thing I ever got hired to do was I was contacted by a woman, and I had the page for about, I don't know, 6 or 8 months. And she's like, hey, I've been following your page. Can you come out and speak to our group of moms? We're a part of this church group. Can you speak? And I was like, speak on what? And she's like, how to be a better dad. And I was like, you got the wrong guy. I was like, that's not me. Like I'm a mess. Like I'm just trying to figure this out. And she's like, no, that's actually what we like. Like it's me and several other women that follow your page. We actually love what you put out, and we want you to talk about it. And I was like, I have no idea what to. I was like, how big's your group? And she's like, not to scare you, it's the largest group. There's like 350 of us. I was like, you want me to speak in front of 350 women? I was like, well, what it means to be a good father. She's like, we just want you to come and speak from your heart. I was like, so I went up and I told my wife that. She was like, what are you going to say? I was like, I have no idea, just the truth, I guess. Like, and so I did that event, and the women loved it. And I was like, man, maybe there's like something here. I don't know. Yeah. So then I started a blog, and then podcast was 10 years ago, and I've been doing this now for 10 years. I still don't have it all figured out, and it's still learning every single week. But yeah, that's been the really messy, crazy, dark journey. Sorry, that was a lot.
I'm very rarely speechless. I mean, well, folks, that's an episode for you. we could end it here and call it a day. Like I was like trying not to cry the entire time. First of all, thank you for sharing your story, because I think it's really, really, really important, not just for other men to hear, but for women to hear. I really do. It makes total sense to me that those women were like, no, we really love this about you. We love you being open. We want you to come and talk, because women, I think especially now, and I don't even know when that was, but this generation especially, we have a tendency to label all men as bad. We have a tendency to label all men as careless and unloving and cold. And I'm not saying there isn't a culture of that being formed in the process, but I've noticed in my line of work especially, we see the worst of men. And there's like this fine line, and I see it all the time. And this is why this conversation is so freaking important, and your story is so important, is because when we're not careful, we end up villainizing men and dehumanizing them. And the truth of the matter is, yes, there are narcissistic people. Yes, there are men that are careless, that don't care. It exists, but that goes for women too. But when we villainize an entire population of people, we don't hear the stories like this. We don't connect anymore. We stop wanting to connect. We start being more afraid of people than wanting to understand them and hear their experience and their story. And I think this is so important, because I know for myself personally, I've struggled. Like I've kind of teetered on that line many times where I'm like, all men are bad. Mm-hmm. They're all evil. They all care about one thing. They hate women. And yet, here we are perpetuating the same exact thing that we are claiming men do. And I just think, I hope and pray that one day, as my podcast evolves, that the bridge is the gap in the bridge is like mended, because we are all human. Mm-hmm. We are all, full of flaws and mistakes. And all of us, 99.9% of us, not including like the psychopaths like Ted Bundy, but we all develop bad patterns and behaviors because of the things we've been through as a way to survive and just be here, Mm-hmm. And like your story, talking about all the abuse and everything you've been through, like, it really is amazing that rather than becoming that, which is what usually happens, I can't even remember the statistics, but the statistics are really high on men in abusive homes almost always become abusive. They almost always do. And so I think this is so incredible and profound, and I want other men to hear this, because there is a choice. You do get the choice. Even for a man that is in a situation right now where he is being abusive, you still have a choice to go, oh shit, I'm repeating the pattern. I'm repeating the pattern. I don't have to be this person. And I'm not saying that things get turned around overnight. I'm not saying that the woman that has endured this should take them and accept that and mend the bridge. In fact, she probably shouldn't. But I just, it's beautiful to me that that's possible. And I don't know that women know that. I don't know that a lot of women realize that. I think a lot of women just think that if you even have the tendency towards abuse, that's who you are.
Yeah.
That labels you entirely. I'm not speechless. Obviously, I just had a rant for 25 minutes, but I just it's just still like hitting me, everything you said. I wonder, like, what would your advice be, like, to someone that was in the position that you were in, knowing what you know now, getting to the place you are now? Like, what would you say to a young man that had a horrendous upbringing like you did, that saw the worst of the worst, that almost in a way you get to a point where it's almost normalized behavior because you've seen it so much and been exposed to it so much. But there is still that tiny part of him that goes, I know this is wrong.
Yeah. I had this podcast guest on, and I think this will hit home for your question. I had this podcast guest on back in 2015, and I thought, like, he at that time, he was the biggest guest I'd ever had, because, like, I was such a fan of this guy's work. His name's Mark Devine. He is a former Navy SEAL. He was a commander in the Navy SEALs. He was the honor man in Buds, and they called him the Cyborg.
I've heard of that, actually.
Yeah, he's the founder of Unbeatable Mind and SEAL Fit. And he wrote a book called Unbeatable Mind. And I'll never forget, when I just started doing this work and I had just started thinking about a podcast, I would listen to he was one of those books that I was just like, I felt like I'd found the X factor in life, because he wrote an entire book on how to create an unbeatable mind, resilience, and overcoming whatever you think you can't overcome. Like, you can literally do anything like, I had dove into self-development like Tony Robbins, and you can be who you want and this and that. But no one laid it out to me like Mark Devine did in that book. And when I asked Mark to come on the podcast and he said yes, I thought, like, I literally met my hero in life, right?
Yeah.
But Mark gave this example that he's like, have you ever heard of the story of the twin brothers that were raised by the abusive alcoholic father? And I was like, no, I haven't. He goes, it's I don't know how true it is, but it's very true. Like, I don't know how true the example is, but, like, two twin brothers raised by the same abusive alcoholic father. These boys were beaten, they were yelled at, verbally abused, all that. One was very successful. One had achieved a ton of success in life, had a great marriage, great kids, like, great father, like, everything was good. And the other one was disastrous. He was a drunk, he was an addict, he was in and out of relationships, in and out of jobs. And when asked the question, they both had the same answer. And it went like this: why did your life turn out the way it did? I had no choice. I was raised by an alcoholic, abusive father, so I had no choice but to live this life. Crazy, right? Both brothers, completely different paths, had the exact same answer to their question. So when Mark told me that, I was like, oh my God. So we literally, by the power of choice, we can create something totally new. I'm not saying either one of those are easy, but if you look at both of those brothers' lives, you could probably say, well, they're both really damn hard.
Yeah.
The guy who's successful probably worked his freaking ass off doing what he's doing to get himself out of that pattern. The other guy's life is also insanely hard because he followed the pattern. And so Mark was like, yeah, which one's going to be harder for you? They're both going to be tough. Like, you might as well figure it out and make whatever choice you're going to make, because the choice is yours. And that was I'll never forget, that was 10 years ago, hearing that from him. And I was like, well, holy shit, there it is. So what does it look like to make that very conscious, purposeful choice every single day?
Right.
And I think this will ease a lot of guys' minds, that if you don't know what to do in your marriage or your parenting or with yourself, number one, you're not alone.
Right.
That's really okay. No one ever tells you this stuff.
Right.
Like, I just bought a smoker at Lowe's, like, last summer, and you bring it home, open up the instruction manual, and the instructions don't say, here's 100 ways not to put this thing together. Figure it out. It tells you exactly what to do, right? But that's coming from my past, and like these twin brothers, like, here's a laundry list of things what not to do.
Mm-hmm.
But that is not enough. I thought that was enough, because what we focus on grows and what we focus on expands. So if I tell you, hey, whatever you do, don't think of an elephant. No matter what you do, don't think of an elephant. That's exactly what you're going to think of. So if you think of all these horrible things that were done to you, what you focus on grows. What you resist will persist, and it will perpetuate.
Mm-hmm.
So the things that I didn't want to happen were actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, okay, what would it look like to chase the things that I want versus run from the things that I don't? Number one, yeah, number one, it's way more fulfilling, versus like, so think of it this way. You and I are recording in January. A lot of people aren't like a health goal. Like if you ask people like, well, why do you want to be healthier? And if people would be like, well, I just don't want to be fat.
Yeah, it's not very much motivation.
It's not. But if you're like, by summer, this is what I want to look like. This is what I want to feel like. This is what I want to be doing. Like, this is what my life will look like when I get there. And to chase that is so much more fulfilling than be like, well, I just don't want to be overweight.
I mean, you can apply that to just choosing relationships.
Right.
If you are, gosh, that is so
Completely,
good.
totally,
like mind-blowing moment, right? Like literally just like for women listening or men that have been in abusive situations. What do you want in a relationship? I always talk about this. Knowing what you want and what you need in a relationship is everything. It literally changes the trajectory of the relationships you end up in, because you're not wasting 6 months with someone when you know exactly what you want and need. If they're not lining up with it, even if it sucks, you're like, this isn't what I want.
Right.
It's not what I need. Like I have to step away from this. Even if I have an attachment to this person, versus like just going in not knowing, having no set goal, knowing what you don't like, but not having a set goal of what it could look like and should look like and what you would like it to look like. You will accept anything. And then you start actually like renegotiating your own values and morals for someone else, thinking, oh, maybe I just need to like tune this part of myself up. Maybe if I do this, then this relationship will work a little better. And then you lose yourself entirely. But yeah, no, that's such a good story. And it's such a good point. And like the way you choose to move forward changes everything.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. And I think, luckily people listening to your podcast, I think that's one of the beautiful things that they get.
Yeah. Is
like, yes, there's been trauma. Like, I don't know anybody who hasn't been through trauma.
Right, exactly. It's life.
But what could life look like, if you chased what you wanted, which I think you have such a strong voice for that for people. Like you and I have talked about that. Like, I think you are that voice, this podcast and what you do, you are that voice that people hear in the dark. Like in their darkest moments when they can hear somebody like, oh wait, she's been through that too. So I can do something different. Insane. If she can do it, like I can do it, right? And I think that's why your mission is so important.
Well, and same with yours. Like there's not enough resources for men. There's a lot for women.
Yeah.
And I think about that all the time, but it's like a woman can only do so much for men, right? Like as far as like, I can't speak to men in the way that you could. Just like you couldn't probably speak to women in the way that I could. And so it's like, True. I know my lane, but I also do recognize the fact that men need so much. Like the resources are limited, and I hate it. I hate it because they need it. It's like such a desperate like situation, especially right now with the generations and everything out there. Men just don't have the role models that they used to have.
I agree.
It's so superficial, and like most young men in their early 20s are looking up to these idiotic guys that just make it look like, oh, have 20 women and just be a millionaire, hustle your whole life, work yourself to death so you can get all these women that mean nothing to you. And it's like, sure, go after that. And when you're 80, you'll be alone on your deathbed.
Yeah.
And miserable. And you might have all the money in the world, but you won't have a single person that cares for you.
I saw a quote not too long ago that some people are so miserable, all they have is their money. It was like this lonely man sitting on a bench by himself, and I was like, holy crap. But can I share something about the resources thing? So when that whole ordeal happened in 2011 with my 4-year-old, and that night where I was like, I'm going to learn something new every day, I agree with you 1,000%. At that point in time, back in 2011, 2012, I was like, I had to hunt for information. And a lot of the information that I found were the bad things that happened, like fatherless homes. And also, I'm like, okay, well, what do we do about it? And there were books and there were stuff like that. And the other thing about books is I felt like when I would read a book, I was like, I feel like I'm like someone's lecturing me. Like someone's like, I want someone to relate to me, right? And there were no podcasts really about it at the time. There was really nothing. And when I first started the Good Dad Project, which is now the Dad Edge, like I was like, well, I'm going to start it then. And what I mean, I'm going to start it, I'm not going to be the expert. I still, to this day, even doing it for a decade, the way I view the podcast, I'm so excited to like every Monday sit with someone who's way smarter than me to talk about whatever their expertise is so I can learn. Mm-hmm. And the cool thing about the audience is we get to learn all together. Like we never get this figured out, you know. And I have a book that's coming out this year called Pursuit of Legendary Fatherhood. Mm-hmm. And it's going to come out Father's Day of this year. And my the publisher, the CEO of his publishing company, he's single. He's not married, no kids. And he asked me, he's like, when I submitted the title, he's like, Pursuit of Legendary Fatherhood. And I was like, yeah, what's wrong with that? And he goes, why not call it Legendary Fatherhood? It'd probably sell more. And I'm like, well, I was like, let's be real. I was like, you're not a dad. I was like, there is no such thing as legendary fatherhood. No one gets to the top of the mountain.
Right.
Like, look, I did it.
I conquered it all.
Yeah, like, look, I'm freaking awesome.
I'll never make another mistake.
Right. I was like, but there is the constant pursuit of the growth and the learning of it and the refinement of it and the mistakes and the potholes and how you recover and how you repair. There's the pursuit. You never get to the top like, look, I did it. Like there was one perfect man that walked the earth. Mm-hmm. And to my knowledge, no dad is going to fill those shoes, but one guy.
Right.
Yeah.
No, but you know what? That's so beautiful. And that is healing too. And that's what I like to portray. And I think that's why people can relate to either of us, honestly, is because I don't have it all figured out. All I know is that when I was alone and hurting and trying to heal from domestic violence and sexual assault, there was nowhere for me to go. That's all I knew.
Yeah.
And when I got my divorce, which was not those things, those were from other relationships, I hit rock bottom and I had never healed from any of that because I had tucked it away because I had no resources at that time. And so I realized that like, as I was pouring out my heart online, just like you, about like, I'm struggling with this and this is what I'm learning and this is what I would tell you or tell myself if I could, people were just like, oh my God, I needed to hear that too. I needed to hear that too. And I needed that too. And I have nowhere to go to. And I also feel alone. And I'm also struggling. And I also want to heal. And like, I just think that the authenticity of saying, hey, we're all human. Like mm-hmm. we're people figuring out, this is our first time here.
Yeah.
It's our first time. And like you said, we didn't get a book. If you're a Christian, you have a Bible, but it's like, there's still certain parts of life that you just have to figure out for yourself.
100%.
And so I think that's what's so beautiful about it is that the more we can just, on platforms especially, go, hey, like, I'm not a person who has it all together. I'm not your guru. I'm not gonna heal you. I'm still trying to work on that part for myself, but I'm absolutely willing to open up my life for you to see my journey through it. And I'm absolutely willing and want you to learn from what I would have loved to have learned from had somebody been a few steps before me, you know?
I agree. I totally agree. I mean, we even compare it to jiu-jitsu a lot. So I've done martial arts over the years. I mm-hmm. did martial arts for about 12 straight years. And then I just started jiu-jitsu. Mm-hmm. And it's so funny. Like when it comes to, you know, your topic of healing from domestic violence, mm-hmm. you know, it's like, that's like, okay, like, how do I go do that? Do I fumble through it or how do I do that? Same thing with being a man, a husband, a father, your marriage, your parenting, everything. If you think about it, think about this. If you want to be a cop, it takes 990 hours of training to be a cop. It takes more to be a firefighter. My youngest brother, who I introduced to you as a guest, he had to go to law school to be an attorney, mm-hmm. right? I mean, if you want to be a priest, you got to go to the seminary. When you become a father and a husband, don't worry, man. You'll figure it out. Best time of your whole life. And the funny thing is, right, I just had Frankie Edgar on the podcast. Well, I didn't just have him, but I had Frankie Edgar on the podcast. I just talked to him again this morning, but he's a UFC Hall of Famer. He actually holds the most minutes in the cage of any fighter. And I was on his podcast not too terribly long ago, and we were talking about this. I was like, can you imagine for a minute, like all the training that you've been through. He was the lightweight champion for a while. I was like, can you imagine like if you never did wrestling, jiu-jitsu, or MMA, and you just like walked in the octagon, you're like, hey, I think I'm gonna fight today.
I've seen enough.
Right. And he's like, I'd get my ass handed to me. I was like, of course you would. I was like, but we get our asses handed to us every day as men, husbands, fathers, parents, like women too, right? I was like,
Gosh, that's so true.
What would it be like to actually go into the jiu-jitsu studio and roll and learn how to defend yourself? Like, that's how you're so good. I was like, the Dad Edge ecosystem, the community, like, this is, I joke about it, but this is where we roll. This is where we learn. Like, and we have guys that do life with us all over the place. And we're like, hey, did you hear what he just said? That's gold. Like, everyone take that. Like, did everyone just hear how he spoke to his wife or how he was patient with his kid? Let's take that. And then you hear somebody who makes mistakes. Like my podcast today was 32 minutes of me falling on my face. Well, let's reverse engineer that. Let's extract the gold out of that too, so we can all learn and be better. But that's the way I think now, going back to the resources, there weren't resources then. Mm-hmm. And my community is not the only one out there for men, husbands, and fathers. There's a plethora. Like 10 years ago, it wasn't there. 10 years now, like you just have to have a phone and you can you can learn.
Same.
But like the thing that I can't stand is people that tell themselves the story of like, well, this is where I came from, so there's no hope for me. No, man. Like, if an idiot like me can figure it out, then I think anybody could probably figure some stuff out.
I mean, that's the truth of it. Like, if you don't believe you can do it, you won't. Like, it doesn't matter how great it looks. Like, if you think, that's not going to be for me. Mm-hmm. I mean, even with, like, the stuff that we do, I don't understand why people listen to me. All the time, I'm like, I'm shocked every day that I get another view, another like, another comment. I'm always like, man, people are just as lost as I am, apparently, because you're listening to me, and I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just putting it out there. But it's like, there's a part of you that has to go, okay, you know what? I may not have it perfect. I may not get it all right, but I believe that I can still do it, and somehow if it's, relevant, it'll make a difference, I
agree. Totally agree.
So, whew, that was a lot, but in such a good way. Like, okay, I want to know that before we like wrap this up, what is something that you wish that women could like understood more about men?
Wow. I can't speak for all men, but doing this work for the past decade, I've known a lot of really good men who've gone through really hard times, and a lot of good men that are very hard on themselves. Mm-hmm. And one thing I can tell you is that for women to know there's thousands of things going through the head of your man and the heart of your man that he'll probably never tell you about. And I mean that in a way that he's not keeping something from you.
Right.
It's that he feels like he can't or shouldn't. So like, I know for one, when it comes, and I've been with Jessica we've been married for 21 years. We've been together for 28. Mm-hmm. And the times where I have been distant, like I would even say cold. Mm-hmm. She would even say angry. I could tell you without a shadow of a doubt, 99.999% of the time had nothing to do with her.
Wow.
Nothing. It had everything to do with the battles that I was battling in my own mind and heart. The self-criticism of like, why can't you be better about this? Like, why can't you talk to her better? Why can't you communicate with her better? Mm-hmm. And here's the other thing too, for a man, I probably shouldn't share this with her because she's going to think I suck, or she's going to think I'm weak, or what if she questions even being married to me because I don't know what the hell I'm doing? Yeah. All these different stories that we tell ourselves. So when your man seems like he might have like that hamster wheel that's just not shutting off, there might be a really good indication that he's battling with like, how can I just do this better? Because I feel like I'm just not. And I don't even, there are times where like, I'm like, I'll look at Jess and I'll be like, I know this sounds kind of crazy, but like, I'm like, why you love me so much? Like, I literally ask her that because she'll tell me, she's like, I'm crazy about you. Like, I love you. Like, she's like, and she's like, she always tells me, she's like, I'm just smitten over you all the time, which I love that. But like, there are times I'm like,
but why?
Why? like, do
you see what I see?
And I was just like, why? And like, like, here's a good example. That story that I told you about with the dog, like I went to Jessica that night and I was like, and she gave me, I was like, hey, give me feedback on, my behavior. Like, give me what was going on in your mind. And she was like, I was very angry with you. Very angry. She's like, and luckily, like, my wife is super patient, but like she really doesn't have like, she doesn't really get pissed. She
doesn't even seem like she could.
No, she's super chill. But like when she was like, I was very angry at you. I'm like, oh shit. Like for her to say that, like she was pissed. And I was like, okay. I was like, tell me more. And she was just like, and she did. She gave me all kinds of great feedback. Well, not great at the time, but like it was good feedback to have. And I just stood there and I just like listened to her. But she said those things. One other thing I want to share real quick, just to kind of deviate. When you give your man feedback, do it lovingly.
Yeah.
Do it because you care about him. Don't attack him. And that's one thing that Jessica, I can say, she never attacks me ever. Like, and she was just like, this is what's going on. And I just stood there and she's like, what's going through your mind? And I was like, I'm humiliated. Like, because that's not who I want to be. That's not who I think I am. And I looked at her and I go, I'm insanely sorry. I was like, that was not me. That's not who I should have been. I was like, and I just looked at her and I go, have I done damage here? And she just looked at me. She's like, damage? And I was like, yeah. Like, have I like ruined like safety with you and like our, like just our connection? And she's like, no. She's like, you've actually made it better. And I was like, how? I was like, I don't understand how. She goes, I can always share this kind of feedback with you and you're always open to it. You're always open to it. And you always own whatever it is that you knew was wrong and you're always apologetic. And she's like, and I know you're insanely aware. She goes, let me give you the flip side of this. If you were to get angry at me, yell at me, defend, tell me just basically fight me on all this stuff because of your pride and ego, that's where damage is done. She's like, but you just being apologetic and owning it, like that is like the sexiest thing ever. I was like, are you serious? Like, are you serious? Like, I just looked at her. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, so I haven't. And she's like, no. In fact, like, it's better. Like the fact that I know that I can come to you and have these conversations with you and you are just the type of man who are just like, shit, man, you're right. Like, I need to do something about that. And she's like, and here's the other thing too. I know that you will. She's like, that's the fine line for me. The fact that not only do you own it, you go and learn, you execute, you implement, and it's better. She's like, very rarely do you ever fall back. She's like, you take a couple steps back here and there, but you're always open to hearing about it, and you're apologetic.
Ladies, I hope you're listening. I hope your standards are raising through this conversation because honestly, though, that is what relationship is supposed to look like. We should be able to be vulnerable enough to say, I was not who I should be today, but also willing to hear that person say, no, you weren't. Yeah. And I didn't like it. And it really upset me without taking it personal, even though it is, but we have to be willing to be open to that and willing to hear the other person without attacking them for feeling that way. But also I think the grace part of it is really, really important too.
I think that, you asked about, what it is for a woman, right? And I think for a man, if you share if you highlight the situation, right? Or like, if you highlight, hey, in this particular situation or instance, this didn't sit well with me versus like, you're just a piece of shit.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like this personal attack sometimes that happens in relationships. I think a man is much more receptive to hearing like, this is what I didn't like about the situation and some of the decisions and maybe even some of the things that were said. However, I know you at your heart, and this is, it was a mistake. It was a situation. It wasn't because you're a bad person. And I think a lot of people attack the person and not the situation or the moment.
Yeah. And I mean, and it's different too, being in a relationship with a healthy man.
Yeah.
Who's willing to work and evolve and grow and see those things and acknowledge those things and look at himself. That's different. In abusive situations, that isn't usually the case. And a woman shouldn't make justifications for someone's bad behavior. But the way they respond to you bringing it up really tells you a lot. And if you aren't with someone that can go, yeah, no, you're right. I screwed up. Like, that was so messed up, and I'm sorry. And then see them. Let them build that trust back in you by proving that they're going to work on it. That's like the defining factor.
I agree. Totally agree.
Well, this has been amazing. I can't wait to. I'm actually really excited to listen to this one. This one's gonna be. It's so good. It's so good. But you guys, this is Larry Hagner again. You can find him. He has the Dead Edge podcast, the #1 podcast for dads in the world, which is incredible. It's so incredible. Hopefully, I'll have the #1 podcast for whatever this is in the world one day too. We'll see, but it doesn't matter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your vulnerability, for your authenticity, for being willing to talk about these hard things in your childhood. I think that's really important for men and women to hear too. But yeah.
Appreciate you. And if I could say anything else to your listeners, it's this. Ashley speaks from her heart. She really, really does. Go out and leave this woman a 5-star review. Share this show with your friends, with your relatives, with your grandma, with your neighbors, with your boss. Like, she works her butt off on this. So
I'm trying.
You do a great job.
Thank you.